It was a warm spring afternoon in Charleston, South Carolina, and the quaint historic church was decorated to perfection. Rows of white roses lined the pews, soft music floated in the air, and guests dressed in their finest whisper with anticipation. Emma Monroe stood in the back room, her heart pounding under the weight of her lace gown. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of her life, marrying the man she thought she would grow old with, Jason Carter. Jason was everything she ever dreamed of. Handsome, successful, funny, and thoughtful in ways that seemed rare. Their love story had started 3 years earlier in a cozy little cafe downtown, when he accidentally spilled his coffee on her laptop and bought her a new one the next day with a handwritten apology note and a request for dinner. From that moment on, Emma had been all in, and Jason had seemed just as sure, planning every detail of the wedding with her, down to the custom vows they had each written. But as the organ music began and the doors opened, Emma took her father's arm and stepped forward with a smile that could light up the room. All eyes turned to her, but as she reached the altar, something was wrong. Jason wasn't looking at her the way he usually did. He looked pale, distant, even scared. She reached him, and he didn't take her hand. "Jason," she whispered, confused. He glanced around the church, then turned to the crowd. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice shaking. "I can't do this." Gasps filled the room. Emma froze. Her world spun as Jason turned and walked straight down the aisle, past stunned guests, past her weeping mother, and out the church doors. There was a moment of heavy silence. Emma could barely breathe. The officiant stepped forward, but she raised her hand. "No," she said softly. "It's fine. Let him go." The truth didn't come out until hours later, when someone posted a video online. A guest at the wedding had spotted Jason outside the church parking lot, kissing another woman. Not just any woman. His ex-girlfriend, Laura Barnes. Emma had heard of Laura, the mysterious girl Jason used to date in college. He had always insisted it ended for good, that it was toxic, and they had both moved on. But it was clear now that Laura had never really left his heart. And whatever reunion had happened before the wedding had been enough to pull him away from a life with Emma. People expected Emma to fall apart. And for a few days, she did. She cried until her eyes burned. She unplugged her phone, ignored the headlines that followed. Groom ditches bride for ex in shocking wedding walkout, and barely got out of bed. But then something changed. She remembered something her grandmother had once told her. Sometimes the people we love are just lessons in disguise. And maybe that was what Jason was. A hard lesson, but not the end of her story. A week after the wedding, Emma posted a photo of herself in her wedding dress, barefoot on the beach, holding a glass of champagne and smiling at the ocean. The caption read, "He left, I stayed, and I'm still standing." The post went viral. Thousands of people commented, praising her strength and grace. Strangers messaged her, sharing their own heartbreaks and how her story gave them courage. A talk show invited her on to tell her story. She declined, but offered to write a column instead, a raw, honest piece about heartbreak, self-worth, and rebuilding. That column led to another and another until she was offered a book deal. She titled it Left at the Altar, Standing in the Light. It became a bestseller. Jason eventually reached out months later. He said he made a mistake, that things with Laura had already ended again, and he missed what they had. Emma replied with a single line, "Thank you for making room in my life for something better." And she meant it, because 1 year later, at a cozy book signing in Boston, she met a quiet, kind man named Noah. He had tears in his eyes when he told her how her words helped him leave a toxic relationship. They talked for hours that day. And a year after that, they were engaged on their terms, with no grand church or fancy promises. Just two people who had seen the worst and still chose love. Emma never regretted that wedding day, because in losing the wrong person, she found everything she truly needed: strength, purpose, and someone who would never walk away. The second time Emma put on a wedding dress, it was simpler. No long train, no cathedral veil, no crowd of distant relatives. Just a sleek, elegant gown that made her feel like herself. The ceremony was held in the backyard of her aunt's lake house in upstate New York, surrounded by trees, twinkle lights, and only the people who had been with her through everything. Close friends, family, and Noah, standing at the altar, eyes filled with nothing but her. As she walked down the grassy aisle barefoot, holding a small bouquet of wildflowers, she wasn't nervous. She wasn't afraid of the what-ifs or haunted by the past. She had already lived through the worst-case scenario and had come out of it more herself than she'd ever been. Noah wasn't the loud, flashy type. He didn't try to sweep her off her feet with grand gestures or poetic lines. But he showed up every day. He listened, learned her moods, remembered the way she took her coffee, and how she liked to fall asleep with white noise in the background. He didn't try to fix her pain. He sat with her in it until she healed. When it came time for their vows, Noah kept it short and sincere. "I'm not going to promise perfection," he said, "but I will always promise honesty, effort, and to never make you feel like you're second choice to anyone or anything. You are it, Emma. You are the only." Her hands trembled a little as she slid the ring onto his finger, not from fear, but from the deep, overwhelming peace of knowing she was exactly where she was meant to be. Later that night, after the dancing and laughter and tears, when the stars were out and the crowd had thinned, Emma sat by the fire pit with her head on Noah's shoulder. The flames crackled softly, and for a moment the world was still. She thought back to that day in Charleston, the white roses, the hush of the church, the look on Jason's face, and she didn't feel bitterness anymore, just gratitude. Gratitude for the detour, the heartbreak, the public embarrassment, because it carved out space in her life for this moment, this love, this quiet magic. Her book had opened doors she never expected. She was now working on her second one, this time not about heartbreak, but about healing, about what happens after the storm, when the dust settles and you're left with nothing but your bare soul, and how beautiful that can be when you finally choose yourself. People still asked her, sometimes, how she forgave Jason, and the truth was, she didn't do it for him. She did it for herself. Holding on to anger was like holding a burning coal in your hand, hoping the other person felt it. It only scorched you. Letting go wasn't weakness. It was freedom. Emma became something of a quiet icon for women who had been through public betrayals or private ones. She didn't try to be a symbol. She just told the truth. And somehow that was enough. Years later, at a book tour event, a young woman stood up during Q&A and said, "When he left you, I thought, how could someone do that to someone like you? But then I realized it didn't matter. What mattered is how you rose from it." Emma smiled, eyes warm. "Sometimes," she said, "we don't get the ending we wanted, but we get the beginning we needed." And she truly believed that, because the story wasn't really about being left. It was about finding your way back to yourself, and eventually, to someone who saw you, chose you, and stayed. The years went on, and Emma's life unfolded in ways she never imagined, beautiful in its simplicity, strong in its honesty. Her second book, After the Fire, Choosing Yourself Again and Again, became not only a bestseller but a movement. Book clubs, therapy groups, and women's retreats across the country use it as a touchstone. She started receiving letters, handwritten, emailed, messaged on social media, from women and men too, who had been left, betrayed, abandoned, or simply overlooked. People who saw themselves in her story. Some were heartbreakingly young, college students who had been ghosted by someone they thought would be there forever. Others were older, mothers, divorcees, widowers, people who had rebuilt their lives piece by piece after their worlds had collapsed. They all thanked her for showing that strength doesn't always look loud. Sometimes, it looks like making breakfast for yourself when it hurts to stand. Sometimes, it looks like deleting a number and not looking back. Sometimes, it's getting up on a Sunday morning and opening the curtains when all you want is to stay in the dark. Emma never tried to be a savior. She responded to as many messages as she could, always with warmth, always reminding them that she was not a hero, just a woman who had refused to let pain define her. Noah was by her side through it all. He didn't compete with her light. He stood beside it. He made sure she stayed grounded when the press tried to elevate her into something she wasn't. He would remind her to eat, to rest, to say no sometimes. And when her old fears came back, when she worried that maybe he would leave too, he never dismissed them. He just held her and said, "I'm not going anywhere." They moved to a small farmhouse outside Asheville, North Carolina, a quiet place with big windows. chickens in the yard, and a writing studio tucked beside a grove of trees. It was the opposite of the life she once pictured, but it was hers. Fully, authentically. One morning, years later, Emma got a letter with no return address. Inside was a folded piece of paper and a small photograph. It was from Jason. The letter was short. He apologized, not for leaving, but for lying, for pretending he was ready, for dragging her to that moment when he hadn't even fully closed the chapter with Laura. He told her he had spent a long time hating himself for what he did, then hating her for moving on so gracefully. And then, he said, he stopped trying to make sense of it and just wished her well. The photo was of a small seaside town. He had opened a little art gallery. The back of the photo read, "Thank you for showing me how to be brave, even if it wasn't with you." Emma read it twice. Then she placed it in a box she kept in her studio. A box full of letters, moments, fragments from her journey. She didn't feel the need to respond. There was peace in not needing closure from others. She had created her own. Her story wasn't about Jason. It never really had been. He was a page. A messy one, yes. One with tears and ink smudges. But not the whole book. One fall evening, while Emma was in the kitchen baking apple pie with Noah, their daughter, a curious, freckle-faced 5-year-old named May, came running in with a ladybug on her finger. She squealed with joy, completely unaware of the story behind her parents' love. Emma watched her with a smile, flour dusting her shirt, the warm smell of cinnamon filling the air, and thought, this is the real ending. Or maybe it's just the beginning again. Later that night, as she tucked May into bed, her daughter asked, "Mommy, how did you and Daddy fall in love?" Emma kissed her forehead. "I had to get really lost," she whispered, "so I could learn how to find myself. And when I did, Daddy found me there, in that quiet farmhouse, with the stars blinking above and the past settled like dust in the corners of memory." Emma knew something for sure. Sometimes the most painful day of your life isn't your undoing. It's the day the ground breaks wide open to make space for everything better that's coming. And that kind of love, the kind that finds you after the storm, when you finally stop chasing someone else's version of happiness, that love stays. Over the next few years, Emma's life unfolded in rhythms that felt almost like poetry, soft, real, imperfect, but deeply true. Her mornings began with the rustling of the trees outside her window and the faint sound of May's bare feet running through the hallway. She would make coffee while Noah packed lunches or fed the chickens, and there was a comfortable silence between them, the kind that only comes with time, trust, and having nothing to prove. Emma continued to write, not just books now, but essays, podcasts, and even a short film inspired by her story that premiered at a small indie festival in Austin. She never went for the spotlight, but it followed her in a gentle, steady way, because people saw something in her that they needed to believe in. That it's okay to fall apart, and more than okay to rebuild differently. She was often invited to speak at events, sometimes in big auditoriums with thousands of seats, sometimes in small community libraries with 20 women sitting in a circle. She liked the smaller ones best. There, she could look people in the eye, hold their hand when they cried, and remind them of something she wished someone had told her years ago. You are not broken. You are becoming. One afternoon, after a talk in Portland, a woman in her 60s approached Emma in the hallway. "I was left too," she said, voice shaking slightly. 32 years of marriage. He met someone new and walked out. I thought it was the end of everything. But then I read your story, and I started painting again. I hadn't painted in years. Emma didn't say anything at first. She just hugged the woman, letting her speak without trying to fix anything. Later, on the flight home, Emma watched the clouds drift past the window and thought about all the invisible threads that connect us, how heartbreak can echo across lives and timelines and somehow make people feel less alone. The pain she once thought would destroy her had, somehow, become the very thing that tied her to others in the most unexpected ways. May grew up quickly, as children do. By the time she turned 10, she had her mother's stubbornness and her father's calm. One night, as they sat on the back porch watching fireflies, May asked, "Do you think it was meant to happen, Mommy? That man leaving you like that?" Emma looked at her daughter, thoughtful. "I don't know if it was meant to happen," she said slowly. "But I do know what we choose after pain. That part is ours. And I chose this. I chose to grow. May nodded, satisfied, and went back to chasing fireflies. Emma sometimes thought about how different her life could have been, how easily she might have stayed bitter, angry, or small. She could have clung to the pain like a shield, refused to trust again, or worse, settled for less than she deserved just to avoid being alone. But instead, she had walked right to the fire and into something better. Not perfect, not painless, just better. One quiet winter morning, many years later, Emma found herself once again standing in front of a crowd. This time, it was at a college commencement, and she was the guest speaker. The snow was gently falling outside the tall windows of the auditorium, and the graduates sat bundled in their gowns, excitement and fear mixing in their eyes. She looked at them for a moment before speaking, remembering what it felt like to have your whole life ahead of you and no idea what would come. "I want to tell you something that might sound strange," she began. "But the worst thing that ever happened to me was also the best thing. Not because it felt good, it didn't. It crushed me. But because it showed me who I really was underneath the dream I thought I needed. It stripped away everything false. And when you're standing there with nothing left but your raw heart and your breath and your will to keep going, that's when the truth starts to bloom." She paused, scanning the sea of young faces. "So don't be afraid when life breaks your heart. Don't run from it. Let it break you open, not down. Let it teach you what matters. And then rebuild, slowly, truthfully, bravely. The life you want might not look like the one you planned, but it might be better. I know mine is." The applause was thunderous, but Emma didn't need it. She wasn't there for validation. She was there because she knew what it was like to think your story was over, only to find it had just begun. And as she walked off the stage and into the quiet snow, she thought again of the girl she'd once been, standing at that altar with hope in her eyes and no idea of the storm ahead. She didn't pity her anymore. She loved her. She honored her, because that girl had survived. And from her ashes, a whole new life had grown, a real one, a beautiful one, and it was still unfolding. Spring returned to mountains with its soft greens and sweet air, and Emma found herself in a new season of life. Not just outside, but inside, too. May had turned 16, somehow, and Noah's hair was flecked with more gray now, which only made her more handsome, in that quiet, weathered way she adored. Their love had settled into something deeper than passion. It was presence. It was knowing that whatever happened in the world, at the end of the day, they'd be side by side, dishes clinking in the sink, porch lights glowing, laughter echoing from the kitchen. Emma had stopped writing for a little while, not because she didn't have anything to say, but because she needed to listen. Life had become so full that she wanted to live it, rather than constantly translate it into words. She spent more time in the garden, growing herbs and vegetables, and losing hours pulling weeds and humming to herself. Some days, she went entire afternoons without touching her phone, without checking messages or watching news. It was peaceful in a way that fame, attention, and success could never quite offer. But one rainy afternoon, while sorting through an old trunk in the attic, Emma came across her wedding shoes from that day long ago in Charleston. Still pristine, still never worn. She sat on the wooden floor, holding them in her hands, and felt a strange blend of emotion, a trace of sadness, but also deep gratitude. Those shoes never carried her down the aisle that day, but in a strange way, they were part of the journey, a symbol of everything she thought she wanted and everything she had been brave enough to let go of. May found her there, quiet and still. "Are those the shoes?" she asked, sitting down beside her mother. Emma smiled. "They are. Do you wish it had gone differently?" Emma looked at her daughter, so full of light and strength and opinions, and shook her head. "If it had gone differently, I wouldn't have you," she said. May grinned. Good answer. That night, Emma sat by the fire with a fresh notebook, the first in over a year. She didn't try to write a book or an article. She just wrote whatever came. Memories, thoughts, bits of dialogue she imagined from characters she hadn't created yet. She didn't edit herself. It felt like breathing again after being underwater too long. In the coming months, that journal became the seed for something new. Not a memoir this time, but novel. Fiction, but based in truth. A woman left at the altar, yes, but not one who stayed broken. A woman who built something wild and whole in the ruins. Emma poured herself into the story. She gave her character rage, joy, confusion, and quiet triumph. She gave her space to fall in love again, not just with someone else, but with life. When the manuscript was done, her publisher loved it. It was released the following spring under a simple title, The Shoes I Never Wore. It was different from her previous work, but it struck a chord. Bookstores held release parties where readers brought their own never-worn shoes, symbols of dreams they had once held that life had gently or fiercely pried from their hands. And everywhere Emma went, people still came to her not because she was famous, but because she was real, because she had been broken publicly and healed privately, because she never pretended to be unshaken, only unyielding. As time went on, Emma's story faded from headlines, as all stories do. But in small corners of the world, it still lived on bookshelves, in bookmarked pages, in underlined quotes scribbled in the margins by people trying to survive their own heartbreaks. Years later, long after her last book tour, Emma and Noah celebrated their 25th wedding anniversary with a quiet trip to the coast. Just the two of them, no fanfare. They walked the same shoreline where she had once stood alone in her wedding dress, toasting her freedom with the ocean as her witness. Now, hand in hand with the man who had never once made her question her worth, she paused in the same spot and let the waves kiss her feet. "You've come full circle," Noah said, brushing wind-tossed hair from her face. Emma looked out at the endless blue horizon. "No," she said softly. "I broke the circle and walked a new path. She smiled at him, "this is the life I drew with my own hands." And that night, while the wind whispered through the dunes and the stars blinked above their little beach house, Emma wrote a letter to her younger self, the girl in the white dress, standing at the altar with tears in her eyes. "Dear me, I know you feel like this is the end, but I promise, oh, I promise, it is only the beginning. He left, yes, but you stayed. You chose to rise, even when it hurt. One day, you'll thank this moment for breaking you wide open, not because it was kind, but because it was true. And from that truth, you'll build a life no one could have given you but yourself. Keep walking. She's waiting for you, the woman you're going to become, and she's worth it. Love, Emma." And she was. Years passed like pages in a favorite book, each one soft-edged and golden, the kind you want to reread slowly. Emma aged gracefully, her face lined not by bitterness but by years of laughter, tears, and truth. She stopped wearing makeup most days, traded high heels for walking boots, and let her silver-streaked hair grow long and wild. There was no need to impress anyone anymore. Her life no longer belonged to a crowd. It belonged to her. May left for college on a crisp September morning, a quiet confidence in her step, her eyes shimmering with goodbye. Emma hugged her daughter tightly and whispered, "Make your own mistakes, not anyone else's." May smiled and said, "Just like you, right?" Exactly like her. Back home, the house was quieter. Emma felt the shift, the silence, the space where her daughter's music used to drift down the hallway, the absence of messes in the kitchen, the stillness of late afternoons. But she didn't grieve it. Not exactly. She honored it, let it change her again, the way all endings do. She and Noah found new rhythms in the stillness. Long hikes, late-night talks, reading beside each other in companionable silence. Emma began volunteering at a local women's shelter, working with survivors of emotional abuse, abandonment, and loss. She taught journaling workshops, helping others find their voice the same way she'd once reclaimed hers. In the glow of dimly lit rooms with folding chairs and worn-out notebooks, she saw women sit up straighter, speak louder, cry freely, and then laugh like it was the first time in years. That's what healing looked like, uneven but unstoppable. One evening, after a workshop, a young woman lingered behind. Her name was Lila. She was no older than 25 and had eyes like someone who'd lived through too many storms for her age. "I know you," Lila said quietly. "I read your story when I was 15. My mom gave me your book after my dad left. I never forgot it. It made me believe I'd survive." Emma's heart caught. She reached for Lila's hand and held it gently. "You already have," she said. "Now it's time to live." Lila smiled through tears, and in that moment, Emma saw it again, what her pain had become. A torch passed down, a light in someone else's dark. One autumn afternoon, Emma stood in her garden, surrounded by golden marigolds and fading sunflowers. She turned the soil slowly with her hands, planting bulbs for the spring she might not live to see. But it didn't matter. That was the beauty of planting. It was an act of hope, of faith in tomorrow. Noah brought her a cup of tea and kissed her cheek. "You know," he said, "we're lucky." Emma looked at him, eyes soft. "No," she said, "we're chosen. We chose each other. We chose this life. Through all of it." And he nodded, because he understood what she meant. That winter, a documentary filmmaker approached her about telling her story on film. Emma hesitated. She had long made peace with her past. It didn't need to be rehashed. But when the filmmaker said, "It's not just about what happened. It's about what you did next," she agreed. The film, what came after, was quiet, powerful, and deeply human. It didn't dramatize the wedding or paint villains. It focused on her journey, the rebuilding, the choice to love again, and how one woman's refusal to give up became a lifeline for thousands. It premiered at Sundance and was later picked up by a major streaming platform. For weeks, Emma received letters from all over the world, from Brazil, Turkey, Kenya, Norway. People telling her, "Your story is my story, too." She replied to as many as she could. And then, quietly, Emma stepped away. She retired from public life. No announcements, no farewell posts. She simply stopped, like a tree letting its leaves go in autumn. She spent her final years wrapped in the softness of a life well loved, cooking for neighbors, watching the moon rise from her porch swing, writing poems that she never published, just left tucked between the pages of books on her shelf. When she passed, it was gentle. In her sleep, in her bed, beside Noah. The same way she had lived, with quiet strength, a soft heart, and unshakable grace. At her memorial, people didn't talk about the wedding she was left at. They talked about the women she helped, the stories she wrote, the garden she grew, the love she gave. May read one of her mother's final poems aloud, voice steady through her tears. "I was not what they thought I'd be, not a victim, not a flame. I was soil broken open wide. And for me, wildflowers came." And just like that, the story that had begun in heartbreak ended in bloom. Not tragic, not bitter, not unfinished. Just real, just human, and endlessly beautiful.